The Spanish-American War was fought between the United States and Spain from April 21st to August 13, 1898. Spain opened the beginning of the age of exploration and once dominated Central and South America, establishing itself as the most powerful country in the Americas. However, Spain was defeated by the United States, and this was signaled the fall of Spain and the rise of the United States. It was an incident in which the United States revealed its imperialist mindset in earnest, actually demonstrating its opposition to the Monroe Doctrine, and which served as an opportunity for the U.S. to rise as a great power. On December 3, 1823, President James Monroe made an announcement before Congress in which he outlined the course of American foreign policy. Through the Monroe Declaration, the United States declared the European powers would not seek to establish new colonies in the Americas and that Europe would not interfere with the newly independent nations of the New World. The declaration made it clear that the U.S. would not intervene in what was happening in Europe, including its existing colonies. The Monroe Principle was that if a European country tried to colonize the countries of the American continent, or start a war, the move would be considered a war against the United States and opposed.
So, the United States abandoned the Monroe Doctrine and pursued an opportunity to have an expansionist diplomatic strategy through the colonization of the Philippines.
Since the Spanish conquest of Cuba in the 16th century during the reign of Isabella I, Cuba had been the most important strategic base for colonial rule in the Americas.
Occupying the island of Cuba gave Spain control of the Strait of Florida and access to other Spanish colonies in the Americas.
So Cuba was Spain's most important colony in the Caribbean, and plantation farming by the Spanish was also prevalent. Cuba was so wealthy that during the 7 Years' War, Britain, which occupied the Spanish government general in Havana, the capital of Cuba, was able to fund all of its enormous war expenditures with the wealth captured from the government general.
However, Spain's power declined, and the Napoleonic Wars and ensuing civil war made it difficult for Spain to manage its colonies properly. When Spain's situation worsened, the Spanish colonies in Americas declared independence and expelled Spanish power from the continent. The United States declared its opposition to European powers' intervention in the Americas by advocating the Monroe Doctrine, which basically stated, "Do not intervene in the Americas." In addition, the desire for independence was rising in Cuba, which was influenced by other colonies that succeeded in gaining independence, including the United States. However, Spain, which effectively gave up its colonies in the American continent due to limitations in Spain's national power, never allowed Cuba's independence, and this position was confirmed by defeating the Cuban Independence Army in the 10 Years' War, which lasted from 1868 to 1878. Meanwhile, the United States was looking for an opportunity to acquire the island of Cuba early as its post-independence national expansion began.
President Thomas Jefferson, who doubled the territory of the United States through the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase, realized the strategic and economic importance of Cuba and expressed interest in it.
Furthermore, the slave states felt a sense of crisis when they saw that a free state was established in California, which was supposed to be a slave state.
The southern slave states had been thinking that they, too, should increase their power by adding new slave states. Thus began an attempt by the United States to annex Cuba under the leadership of southern slaveholding expansionists.
In 1854, under President Franklin Pierce, Secretary of State William Marsh secretly gave instructions to the ambassadors of the three countries. In Ostend, Belgium, the U.S. Ambassador to Spain, Pierre Soulet, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Kingdom, James Buchanan, and the U.S. Ambassador to France, John Mason, met secretly to discuss strategies for the annexation of Cuba.
They wrote a report and submitted it to the White House. The content of the report said the U.S. purchased Cuba from Spain is beneficial to the national interest, and the purchase amount was estimated at about $150 million. If you think about it, this price was 10 times the price of $15 million for the Western Louisiana region purchased in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and more than 20 times the price of Alaska purchased at $7.2 million. The United States had received Florida through negotiations with Spain in 1819, so it was expected that Spain would respond positively to this proposal. Up to this point, the content was understood, but the problem was the conditions behind it. If Spain refused this offer, it was included that it is justified to take it by force. In other words, if Spain refused to sell Cuba, the US would go to war with Spain and take Cuba by force as it had done with Mexico a few years before. After some time, the contents of this Ostend statement were leaked due to a mistake by Pierre Soulet, and Spain's reaction was that the threat was nonsense and absolutely impossible. Spain's claim at the time was that Cuba was not simply an overseas colony like France's Algeria. Spain had invested steadily in Cuba for hundreds of years, sent immigrants, and considered the island to be a legitimate integral territory of its own country, in which the local society had been elaborately nurtured. Moreover, if Spain refused the offer, the US claimed that it was justified to take Cuba by force. It was an act of open disregard for Spain, tantamount to threatening to prepare for war if the colony was not sold. The United States' attempt to annex Cuba fizzled out in the face of vigorous protest from European powers, such as Britain and France, who were astonished by this move, as well as northern free states, who were angry at the attempt to expand slavery by force. However, beyond the ostensible statement, U.S. interest in the island of Cuba continued to grow. Over time, Cuba's plantation capital was largely replaced by American capital due to active U.S. intervention. An increasing number of Americans resided in Cuba, and as a result, American subjugation of the Cuban economy deepened. In 1894, just before the war, 90% of Cuba's exports were destined for the United States, while 40% of Cuba's imports were from the United States. In effect, Cuba had become an economic colony of the United States, and it was natural for Spain to lose ground to the United States in exerting influence across the Atlantic. Even in this difficult situation, Spain was never going to give up on Cuba. Apart from Cuba, the U.S. also showed interest in other Spanish colonies such as Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, but at that time, the U.S. did not show as active an interest in these as in Cuba.
Cuban independence forces failed to achieve complete independence in the 10-year Cuban War of Independence from 1868 to 1878, and more failed armed uprisings took place in 1879 and 1880.
After these failures, the Cuban independence forces, which were quiet for some time, started a war again in 1895. Cuba's independence forces, backed by American capital and munition support, fought fiercely to avenge their defeat in the last war, and Spain also fought an all-out war with a determined will to prevent independence.
The war across the sea was unfavorable to Spain, whose national power at the time was poor because both military and economic power had declined to the point that it was not suitable for a large-scale war. At the time, the quality of the Spanish army was also ranked second or third in Europe.
After about 3 years of war, the Cuban Independence Army secured a significant part of the island of Cuba. However, a decisive victory was yet to be achieved. On January 25, 1898, the United States Navy dispatched warships under the pretext of ensuring the safety and protection of American residents in Cuba, under the order of President William McKinley of the United States.
The American battleship dispatched the ACR-1 USS Maine battleship, a second-class battleship with a displacement of 6,682 tons, equipped with 24 guns to Havana. However, at 9:40 p.m. on February 15th, the Maine battleship sank following 2 explosions of unknown cause that occurred simultaneously in Havana Harbor. The incident killed 261 of the 351 crew members. The explosion occurred under the crew's sleeping quarters, resulting in many casualties. Captain Charles Dwight Saxby was writing a letter to his wife in the captain's quarters at the time of the explosion, when he fell and fortunately survived with minor injuries. The survivors, including Captain Charles Dwight Saxby, The foremost survivors of the battleship Maine were rescued by nearby Spanish naval forces. The United States was shocked and soon launched a fact-finding investigation. Spain proposed a joint investigation, but when the US refused, Spain had no choice but to conduct an independent investigation, and on February 20th announced that the ammunition explosion was caused by spontaneous combustion in a coal deposit. On the other hand, the US investigation team announced at the end of March that the result of the investigation is that the ship sank due to a mine explosion.
However, the report intentionally did not specify who had attacked. In the end, the divide between the two countries was clearly revealed, and public opinion in the United States began to cry for revenge.
The slogan that came out at this time was, "Remember the Maine," which is the origin of the later, "Remember the Pearl Harbor."
In fact, the cause of the sinking of the battleship Maine has not been clearly identified until now, more than a century later. This mystery is the part that both the United States and Spain agree on.
The United States, which wanted to go to war, wanted to use a cause for the war coming from Spain, and the possibility that the explosion was a self-inflicted false flag operation by the United States cannot be completely ruled out. In many wars around the world, incidents in which self-inflicted attacks are used as a justification for war are, in fact, historically common. Thank you for watching the video Spanish-American War Part 1 provided by History and Current Events. I'm Mia, Rebecca, Katie, Leah and Tony have contributed so far as narrators. Thank you.